All right, I got a very special video for you today. This past Saturday, I did a webinar and it was awesome. Over 400 people showed up. So what you're going to see in this video is a recording of that webinar. It's chock full of information. Got some personal stories in there, student critiques, and stick around to the end because I got something you don't want to miss. All right, let's jump on into the webinar. I think we've got a good amount of people. It's 4 minutes. I know some people are going to keep rolling in, but kind of the main topic or through line, I guess, of this talk is going to be saving you guys like 10 years of trial and error because honestly, like that's the way I learned to paint. I don't know if like anybody knows, like I didn't go to art school. I never really had formal training. I learned through trial and error, which I actually don't really recommend. So that's going to be the main focus of what I'm going to be talking about in this presentation. I really like doing these. I've done a few of these Q&As and I really like it. The YouTube videos are great, but like having this long form to really get into stuff and really explain it, I feel like is extremely beneficial for people. And like, I really wish I would have had something like this when I first started painting. But before we get going, like I always like to set goals for, whenever I do these presentations, like even when I go on like workshops, I always like to at the end be able to identify like specific things that I walked away learning or what I got out of it. So like kind of 5 questions I want to ask you guys in terms of like what you want to learn. Like if you'd like to learn how to, speed up your learning process like by at least 5 times, like this talk is going to be helpful. You're going to really enjoy it. That's one of the things I want to be able to give to you. Another thing is not getting overwhelmed with details in paintings. I hear about this all the time. This was a huge problem for me. I would like look at photos and be like, I don't know how to paint that. Like I'd look at this, if I tried to paint this 10 years ago, I'd be like, all those houses, I'm not even gonna try painting this. Or I'd see like a tree and all the leaves, like, oh, what do I do? What do I do? So I want to be able by the end of this to help y'all with that aspect of not getting overwhelmed with detail. And then I want you to be able to see paintings everywhere. Um, this was huge for me because I tried 10 years ago to like go out and plein air paint, and I would literally drive like an hour to a park, walk around a park for an hour, and not even take my paints out because I didn't see anything to paint. So I didn't know what would make a good painting. And once I learned a few like specific things, like it just the world of possible paintings just like opened up to me, and it's like I see paintings everywhere now. Um, and so like the one thing that is going to help you with all 3 of these is the fundamentals. And the way I like to think about it is there's 2 paths you can take. There's like the trial and error path, and then there's the fundamental path. And I definitely took the trial and error path, and it is a long, hard, frustrating path. And I'm sure a lot of you are on that path right now. So I want to show you kind of what is involved in this other path and how I wish I would have taken this path of understanding the fundamentals. So in order to do that, I guess I got to tell you a little bit about my painting history for you, those that don't know. There's a little picture of 6-year-old me. I started drawing very, very young. I was like, probably 3 years old when I started drawing, but uh, I got into like watercolors and acrylics first. And even when I was really young, I kind of always knew how I wanted to paint, but I never knew how to get there. Like I would buy books that had paintings in them and copy the paintings. Like this one up top is a watercolor I think I did when I was 9 years old. Um, and I would copy other paintings and I really wanted to paint a certain way, but I never knew how to get to it. Like I never knew what I needed to do. And I don't know if any of y'all ever bought these books. I actually found these recently. My mom was moving and I found these old painting books that I bought from Michael's. And these things, I remember when I got these were like from like 2003. Um, I like cherished these books because they had all these paintings in them that were paintings that I wish I knew how to paint, and I would try and copy them, and it just seemed like a magic trick to me, like how people painted this way. Um, I would like walk by galleries and malls and like walk in and look at these paintings and be like, how do people do this? And I just was I because I wasn't getting any real
help at that point. This I grew up in the 90s. I was born in 1990, so the internet wasn't what it is now. Like there was definitely no free content or anything like that. Um, and in high school, my high school didn't even offer oil painting. This painting here, like this is kind of shows you how like lost I was at the time. This is my attempt at a Bob Ross tutorial. It's not too bad, but I just felt very lost. I remember I got a D in art class in high school at one point, and I was just really frustrated because nobody was teaching me what I wanted to know. Um, I did get lucky though, and then I did have one instructor when I was 17. I took an art class at a community arts center, like outside my school, and it was great. And he taught me like enough to get me going. And I really wish I could have stayed and learn with him more, but I had to go to college, so I literally only could take like a few months of his class, but it was like just enough to like let me go out on my own. But I was very stubborn early on. Like I wouldn't do painting exercises. I didn't know what it meant to study. I every time I painted, I wanted it to be a painting that I would hang up, which isn't the best way to go about it, honestly. Because then I went to college. I went to USC, and I thought, oh, this is great. I didn't major in art. I actually majored in acting, theater school, but I took a painting class every single semester. I was like, great, like I'm in like a big college. They're going to teach me how to paint finally. And it was not the case at all. I was literally just like left on my own. I think I took the highest level painting you could take by the time I was a sophomore. And then the instructor's like, you can do independent study, which is pretty much you just go paint on your own and then bring your paintings to me and I'll give you advice. But I just remember like not being able to like relate to anybody because nobody in there was trying to like learn how to paint. I remember there was this one kid in there. He would take like an 8 foot by 4 foot canvas, paint it all black, and then spend the rest of the semester sewing teddy bears that he'd staple to the canvas. And I just remember being like, I think that's sculpture, not painting. And I was over there like trying to learn how to paint and just getting no real help. These are like a couple paintings I did. Like there's one of the top here is actually the art school. Like I remember telling my instructor, I'm like, yeah, I'd like to learn how to plein air paint. Like I see these people that go out and they paint landscapes, and he was just like, all right, well, just go outside there and paint. I'll come walk around and see how you're doing. Like didn't get any technical advice whatsoever. I set up a still life of some stuff and just started painting. And, it would turn out good. Like I have good paintings here or there. But it just always felt like a roll of the dice if a painting was going to work well or not. Never like went into a painting with a ton of confidence. I'd hit plateaus and not know why. And I'm just like, what am I missing here? Like, how do I get to where I want to be? So college, I did get better in college, just from just painting a bunch of paintings. Like I thought I could just improve by just painting paintings and you can, it's just very, very slow. So I got out of college. This is 2012. Um, Still buying a lot of DVDs. There wasn't any real free content online. It started coming in. There were starting to be like paid online courses and tutorials and they would help. I would buy like a DVD for 150 bucks, which was like a fortune to me then. And like, it would be like one tutorial on there. And I would pick up some things and they would help, but I felt like I was just scratching the surface. And I felt like a lot of times I would get distracted from like the lesson through like people's materials or their techniques. I'd be like, wait, why are they using linen, not canvas? Like, wait, why do they have those colors on their canvas? Why are they starting a painting that way? Why is that guy using a squeegee? And I felt myself spinning my wheels a lot. I felt like I was making a lot of lateral moves and no forward moves. I also realized that just because people are great painters, they're not great teachers. I'm sure a lot of you can relate to this. Like you're watching a tutorial, it's like amazing painting, but they're just kind of painting in silence and they're like changing things and doing things and you're thinking in your head like, wait, why are you changing that? Why did you choose to do that? And I mean, I get it, like painting is, especially when you've been doing it for a long time, you're not really thinking about what you're doing. So I mean, it's hard to talk while you paint. So, but just running into all those and I would also find myself not knowing what to paint a lot of times, and that would cause me to go months without painting, which is not a good feeling. So you know that my whole 20s was the trial and error period for me. And I kept buying the courses, I kept buying the books, like I didn't give up. I did manage to, figure it out, and I would get lucky with some paintings. Like this painting here is a painting I did when I was in my early 20s that I felt turned out well and still holds up. I like this painting. But I remember doing this painting and thinking, all right, I like this. This turned out well, but I have absolutely no idea why this turned out well or like why I like this. And I'll talk a little bit later about why this painting works. Um, but like I said, like I did eventually figure it out enough through taking, oh my goodness, so many tutorials and DVDs. You have no idea like how many I took. And um I remember I'd get DVDs in the mail that were like $300, and my roommates who aren't painters were like, "Will you spend $300 on it?" I'm like, "Yeah, I need to learn." Um, but like at a certain point I made a discovery because I was like, "Wait a second, like I've learned, from 10 plus different instructors, different methods, different materials, different ways of starting a painting, but they all seem to have the same like core fundamental ideas at the center. Those are the fundamentals of painting. Like I kept hearing the same things like drawing, color, value, edges. And I realized like, oh, that's it. It's easy to get distracted by what materials people are using or how they're um, building a painting, their style. That can really blind people to like what's actually working or like their subject matter. Um, and so I was like, okay, I need to focus on these things because they're going to allow me to paint the way I want to paint. And, I've heard about drawing and color and value and edges all through college and everything. But I think for me, I needed to like go through that trial and error period of in that suffering to like realize, oh, like these fundamentals, they're going to allow you to paint the way you want to paint. Because, I hear from a lot of people that say like, oh, I just want to paint paintings. Like I don't want to spend time doing exercises and I don't want to get all academic with it. I just want to have fun. And I understand that. Like I was like that. But the truth is, um, these fundamentals, like when you realize what they're going to allow you to do and you understand their power, they're not going to be boring. They're going to be really, really fun because the better you get at them, the better your paintings are going to get and the more fun you're going to have. So like this completely shifted how I went about painting. I started focusing not on like subject matter. I focused on the fundamentals. I would do exercises. I would always like a little trick or tip or whatever you want to call it that I did was I always would have like a 16 by 20 cheap panel that was ready to be painted on anytime I didn't know what to paint, like I just pull it out and just do a little study like this one right here. It's got a whole bunch of little studies, and this is just me practicing the fundamentals, whether it's doing the plain fruit, you can see at the top, or doing a very small, like 4 inch tall study of some flowers, studying the eye, the values, the shape, the upside down portrait of Tommy Lee Jones that's like half finished. I was just kind of practicing the overall structure of the head and then the colors that are in it. And what happened was I stopped relying on luck to get me through paintings. Um, Before I'd go into a painting, I'd be like, all right, I'm just going to try and copy this image and just hope it turns out well. Um, and I would also fall into the trap of thinking like bigger is better and more detail is better and the more time is better. If I want to paint a great painting, I need to get a big canvas and it needs to have a lot of detail. I need to spend a lot of time on it. And I mean, those can be fun in a sense, or they have their place, but I started spending a lot less time on paintings. I started doing a lot of small, fast paintings because what I realized is each painting, like each subject you have, it can only offer so many lessons. Like each painting offers a certain amount of lessons that can be learned. And you have to go from beginning to end to get the full lessons. Like you have to draw it in, you block it in, color, build the form, detail, and stuff like that. So if you do a painting that takes you a week, opposed to a painting that takes you a day, like you could do 7 paintings within that week. And so that completely shifted also just time wise. Like if I felt like I didn't have a lot of time that day, I could just be like, all right, I'm going to do a quick, 45-minute painting. And, yeah, I wish I could have spent more that day, but like at least I got something in. So it completely changed how I went about it. I also streamlined my materials because I wasn't looking to materials for answers, which I feel like a lot of people can relate to that of thinking, oh, if I got this color, then my paintings will get better. If I get this brush, this canvas, if I get this light, this is going to make things better. Or I saw so and so doing this, I need to get that. And materials can, they can help, they can make things easier, but I feel like especially when you're just starting, it's such a it can be such a waste of energy looking for answers within those. It's kind of like saying, "Oh, I need to learn how to drive a car." Well, I'm not going to learn until I can get like a super nice Lamborghini to drive. I don't need to get into a, S10 Chevy pickup and, from the 90s and learn that. I need a Lamborghini. It's like learn on what you can. Um, and a good example of like realistically what this looked like in comparison, this self-portrait I did on the left is from when I was 17 and it's all right. It looks like me. One of the right eye is a little wonky. My nose is a little small. The values are a little off, but I don't know. I feel like it's such a good example of trying to hide behind like flashy colors. Um, like my shirt's very, very blue. My hat's got a bunch of colors. My face has a bunch of unrealistic colors. And, I mean, that can work. Uh, but I know because I did the painting that like I did this because I didn't have the foundational skills of understanding color and value. And I was trying to like distract from the areas I was deficient in by throwing in flashy colors. Whereas this painting on the right, even though it's an exercise and I did it in 45 minutes and it's very, very simple, to me, it shows a much better understanding of the fundamentals of value relationships, of the planes of the face, of brushwork, of being able to communicate so much with so little. Like another way to think about it is I feel like the painting on the left is 5-page essay from like a high school student on a topic, whereas the right is a 1-page essay from like a college student or professional that gets across the exact same information, if not more. So this is just a good example of how I had more direction with my practice. I also could coach myself, which was huge. I get a lot of people ask me like, what do I do if I don't have like a painting instructor or someone to look at my paintings to give me advice? I always say, just take the fundamentals, take drawing, color, value, composition, simplification, and just look at your painting and just go through those in your head. And it won't be long before you'll realize, like, ooh, my values are off, or I could have drawn that a lot better, or this composition's kind of boring. And yes, it will take time to get better at those and to be able to identify them better, but it will help you so much into just being able to coach yourself from painting to painting and just make you a more self-sufficient painter because no matter what your problem is, like even me, like today, like if I paint something, I'm constantly just thinking about the fundamentals. And it's when I kind of get away from those that I feel like I start struggling with my paintings or I'm not making as much progress and I have to like come back, go back to the fundamentals and realize that any problem I have, like it's crazy how we'll try and convince ourselves that we have some specific problem and it's like no, it can all your problems can be related back to the fundamentals. And so like kind of coming back to this idea of, 5X and your improvement, in terms of time, this painting I did was a 30-minute painting. And I learned so much in this 30 minutes. I learned that I needed to change the value of the sky to make the dome here read like it's getting hit with sunlight. I learned how I needed to push different color temperatures to get that sun setting light effect. I learned exactly how much detail I could not put in and get away with these buildings. Like these buildings here, it's just a bunch of kind of lighter shapes. And like this boat here is just a light shape. And so like I figured out what I could get away with. I figured out, ooh, I should probably put this gondola in light to just kind of balance out the painting a little bit more. And I did this in 30 minutes. And like, is this a completed, super polished painting? No, it is practice, but I learned a lot. And so if I wanted to paint this again bigger as a completed painting, it would take me a lot less time. And I remember back when I was doing like one-on-one coaching, I had a student who just insisted on painting bigger. Like, when I say bigger, I mean 11 by 14, 16 by 20. And like, for example, they would paint this and show me, and I'd be like, oh, like you made the values in the buildings too bright, or you need to warm up the color and the white of the building being hit in light. And they'd be like, oh, man, I spent all day working on this. I'm like, yeah, or you could have done it 6 by 8 and spend like 30 minutes or maybe 40 minutes and we would have still been in the same place. Like I would have told you to make the changes, and the fact that it's small and simple, you could have made the changes real quick, and we would have learned that lesson, and we would have moved on. And I know there's a lot of resistance to painting small. Like I hated painting small when I first started out. I always feel like, no, I'm different. Like I need to paint big. I want to paint big. But it's funny, like the more I learn, the better I get, the more I realize like how much I like painting small. And especially with landscapes, like these landscapes behind me that you see, like I would never ever try to just do those straight out. Like I would first do, honestly, I'd do a small pencil sketch, and then I would do probably like a 3 by 4 inch painting in a sketchbook, just the base colors, then do a 9 by 12. And then once it kind of, went through those tests, then I would try and make it bigger because I'm just like, there's nothing more demoralizing and more frustrating than like working on a 30 by 40 all day and trying to fix things and realizing you need to change the values and I need to move that tree and I need to do this and it can just drive you crazy. So like so you can see, if you spend 3 hours painting this versus 30 minutes, that's 6 times like the practice. And it's just going to help you, it's going to help you progress a whole lot faster. And coming back to this painting, like I said, knowing the fundamentals, I now identify why this worked. And there's two main regions. One's composition and the other's edges. It's got this little path at the bottom here, which is a good lead into the painting, kind of brings you in into the left. And then these walls here, this was like an old house, and just all that was left was the chimney. But these kind of bring you back to the right of the painting, and this brings you back up. So your eye goes through the whole painting pretty well. And there's also a good variety of edges, meaning these bushes are very soft. And they're reading like that, the texture. And it's a good contrast with the hard edges of the bricks that are in this. And so those together, it just makes it more interesting and more dynamic. Also, there's a clear focal point. This chimney here is a dark surrounded by all the light, so your eye's going to eventually get to here. There's no real other area where a darkest dark and lightest light are touching. So that's kind of why this is working. And again, like I wish I would have known that back then because it would have allowed me to replicate that and look for that in my next painting. So I'm going to actually take a look at some student examples here. I love looking at students' work. And this is actually a painting done from Paint Week. And the students is on the left. And the apple's great. A lot of good form. Love the colors. Even love like where the stem goes down into this part of the apple is reading really well. The only thing was I felt like they could have dialed the values better in the lemon. I feel like their highlight isn't reading as like a powerful highlight. And so over here, I just used Photoshop and surrounded that highlight with a little darker of a yellow. A lot of times, if you got like a light or a glare or something that's not popping the way you want it to, I feel like most of the time it's because the darks around it aren't dark enough because their light's pretty light here. You can't go much lighter than that. It's almost white. And so just always realize the value relationships, that fundamental idea of something's only going to be as bright as the darks are around it. That's the same reason why if you got your front porch lights on in the day, you don't notice them, but once it's dark out, you notice them because they're surrounded by darks. So same thing there. Now this student's painting, doing a really good job. They got a really good portrait going, great drawing, uh, great form, a lot of really good things. The only thing I would again look at is I feel like they got too zeroed in on the values and the shadows, and I see they kind of push the values a little too light, and so they're not like this whole right eye and cheek. I think they got a little too light, and it's not reading so much in the shadows. To kind of illustrate this more, I put it into Photoshop, put it in black and white, and put a filter on it. And I thought this was really when I did this. I saw the arm here, and look how many different bands of values there are to communicate that cylinder form. Whereas there's just two. Same thing can be seen in the face, like this cheek, how much light there is over here. It's just like a little shape of light. There's just not. They could have put more lights. They could have pushed the light side of the value scale and the dark side more. Like look at the darks in the shadow of the face, how dark they get. Also, how simple, like, don't be afraid of simplicity. You can communicate this shadow side of the face with less shapes because you can't see it. Like when things are in the shadow, they're harder to see, so you can see less shapes. So don't be afraid to paint things more simple in the shadows. But you can see like how dark, look how it's like almost black where the eyes are, and even the value around it. It's just much darker than what's in here. So I thought that was really interesting. So if I was coaching the student, I would tell them focus on getting better at the foundational skill of value relationships. And some things you can do with that are a small head study, like this one on the left. It's super small, and it's going to prevent you from getting too like lasered in on those details. Like you're not going to get caught up in all those subtle value shifts in the shadows. You're going to be forced to kind of stay in big picture mode and just be thinking light and shadow. Another one you can do is this. You put it in the Photoshop, or you can use, there's a free app called Value Study. It'll just break your photo down into different like value layers. And I've done this a lot with like exercise. You just break it just light and shadow. So it's just two values. And then you can add another layer of values. So then there's three, and then there's four. And it just helps you break down the face into big, simple value shapes. So that's another very good, helpful exercise to do if you're struggling with that. This student painted uh, two cloves of garlic, and they specifically asked me about background. And I get asked about backgrounds a lot, whether it's this, a still life, pet portraits, regular portraits. People always struggle not knowing like what to do for the background. And the way I make my decisions about backgrounds is just thinking about the fundamentals and thinking about what I want to do. So I just put it in Photoshop, and I chose to push the background a little bit darker to make the garlic lighter and look like it's being hit with more light. Also cooled it to make the garlic seem warmer, getting hit with warmer light. I also desaturated it because I wouldn't want it to be a super bright, saturated color and take away from the main subject of the garlic. So like that's a background that I just completely made up, but I made it up based off decisions on the fundamentals of painting and I knowing like kind of the cause and effect of doing certain things. So moving on to overwhelming detail. This gets people a lot. Like they look at these flowers and be like, "Oh, I gotta paint every single flower petal." And and I was the same way. Like I would look at that and be like, "All right, because I'm gonna draw out every single flower petal and try and paint it." Um, and I get a lot of students saying, like, "How do I do it? Like, how do I ignore the detail?" Uh, and I feel like the best way to ignore something is to focus on something else. So instead of focusing on detail, focus again on the fundamentals, focus on the value, focus on the big shapes. And what I've done here is I put it in Photoshop and just kind of put a filter on it to get rid of detail. But as again, you saw this painting earlier, it's like a very small study and I just wanted to focus on dialing in the right values and the right shapes. I wasn't concerned with individual petals, and you can see how much it works without the detail. And doing things like this, like working really small where you can't get the details, it's going to train your brain to not focus on the details, and train your eye not to focus on the details. So if this is a problem of yours, and you're like, I can't not see it. Like when I see a landscape, all I see is all the leaves on the tree. Try to divert your focus to one of the fundamentals, whether it's color, value, or drawing, like simplifying into big shapes. For those that went through Paint Week, you guys had to do that in the landscape that you did with all the lily pads. We didn't go in there and paint every single lily pad. We grouped them and we blocked out the big shapes. Another perfect example is this painting and seeing all the little houses. And what I did here was I utilized some basic foundational ideas of like atmospheric perspective. And I used a lot of cooler greens, desaturated greens in this mass. And with the houses, when I laid down the lighter color for the houses, I specifically let it kind of blend in a little bit to that green paint to make them softer. Because the last thing I would want is for these to be very crisp and a lot of hard edges. I want softer edges because I want this to sit in the distance. Like as things get further away, they get a little fuzzier. They get less defined. And so that was, a thing that I had to do. I couldn't just copy the photo exactly. I had to rely on the fundamentals to communicate that. You can also see a lot of little cooler colors, like little blues in the shadows. I was like, okay, I need this to be pushed back further. How can I do that? Cooler colors recede. I'm going to push those. And even in the landmass in the back here, it gets even cooler. You can see a lot of blues. It's also painted a lot, more simple. The further it gets back, the more simple it's going to get. Also, there's a lot less contrast. Like the darks aren't very dark here. I saved those, like these rocks in the front are a lot darker than any darks right there because they're, in front. So look for colors, look for values, look for edges. Don't be thinking subjects. Don't be thinking like houses. Uh, Now a lot of the people paint portraits. This portrait I did my brother. And I would say like don't look for hair, look for soft edges. Um, for a long time I struggled painting beards, especially like really short beards or like stubble. And like you see here in his beard, I didn't paint any individual hairs. I just made the correct color shift and the correct value shift. And I let the paint from his beard blend in with the paint from his skin to create that soft edge. And that's going to communicate to the viewer that that's hair. Like the same thing right here. Like the close like shaveness on the side of his head, just getting the right color, the right value, and letting that paint blend together is going to give the illusion of that short hair. Instead of looking for wrinkles, like he has wrinkles, I didn't paint them. Look for planes. Like the forehead here, there's three distinct planes. There's the shadowed plane on the far right, middle plane it gets a little lighter, and then right here, this is the plane that's angled closest to the light. just like the plain fruit that you painted in paint week. Understanding those planes is going to help you communicate the form. It's going to help you identify the values. Same thing goes with a portrait. Um, and this is another great example. This was like an exercise I did, and I put the photo reference into Photoshop and like just broke it down to very simple shapes and tried to paint it in very simple shapes. And so like even when it comes to features, don't be thinking so much features uh, as far as shapes. Like this eye is just a collection of sh simple shapes, but they're in the right value and they're drawn in right. And you can see how much is communicated with just shapes. Like a lot of times I see people and they'll feel they need to draw out the eye and then draw the eyelid and then fill it all in. And they should be trying to put shapes next to each other. Like doing that is going to help you not get overwhelmed with detail. Now, jumping into some good student examples, the student's paintings on the left, I altered it in Photoshop on the right here. First off, they did a really good job because their photo reference was black and white. So, very good choice to make the sail red because it's surrounded by a bunch of green. Those are complement colors. It's a fundamental idea. It's a good idea. Um, but I feel like they got too caught up in detail in the weeds here on the shoreline. Like it looks like they tried to go in and paint every single one. And in mine, you can see like I just simplified it and just knowing the basic idea of values and light source, knowing that the sun is coming from above and thinking about the grass as like a platform and the top of the platform is going to catch more light than I always call it like the shelf and then the wall, like the wall part of the platform is going to be darker. So just getting that is just going to give volume to the grass. And then the idea again of atmospheric perspective, like I was saying in the previous like beach cliff painting, the grass shifts and gets a little cooler and a little more desaturated back here. The same goes with the trees. Like the trees in the foreground are a lot warmer than the trees in the background. So that's just going to help a lot in simplifying and keeping your eye focused on your focal point, which is the boat here. Same with the clouds. There's like a lot of little clouds, and I felt like it was like distracting, so I just simplified it into just like kind of one big mass of clouds. But also the trees, you can see like they tried to go in and put like a whole bunch of details and a bunch of different colors and values. But these trees are in the distance, like they're far away, especially these back here. And this is crudely done with in Photoshop, but you can see how just using three values, you can create the form of the trees and get them to read and sit in the distance pretty well as long as you got the right colors and the right values. Now, another student example. This is actually example, their originals on the left of how to use detail. Like, I don't want you to think like detail's bad. Like, detail has its purpose and it can help you. And all I did in this one, because I got a good painting going here, is I just added some more shapes in the front left corner here to kind of distinguish some more lily pads. Because getting more detailed there up front, it's going to bring it closer to us. And so everything else is going to get pushed back. It's just going to add more depth because they did a good job of keeping their shapes simple in the back here and not having a bunch of small little shapes. But I think they could have actually pushed a little more smaller shapes in the front there. So it's a good example of using detail to their advantage. All right, now let's talk about seeing paintings everywhere. Uh, Once you get a hold of these fundamentals, how you look about like how you look at the world pretty much, or what you look to paint is going to change because you're not going to be so drawn to subject matter as much as these fundamentals or these like how these fundamentals manifest in certain subject matter. For example, like this cove, these two different photos, two different times a day. The one on the top, it just lends itself to a painting so much more. Like I could give you a pen and you could outline the big shapes of that scene very easily. It's just, everything is simplified already for you. Whereas the bottom, I mean, you could still do a painting out of it, but it's going to be a lot harder to translate that. And a lot of times, this happened to me a lot, and I see it with students, is they kind of get drawn in by an effect, or just like one element of the scene, and they try and make a whole painting just because it has that one thing. Like this one down here, I admit it is cool, the reflections in the bottom, and you got this turquoise boat is really cool. Just all these cool colors in the water, and you could be like, oh, I want to paint that all those cool colors in the water and everything, but everything around it isn't like really lending itself to making a good painting. You'd have to change probably a lot, or just maybe just focus in on the water. Um, but this is just going to help save you so much time in not painting scenes that are just going to be really difficult to pull off. And you won't be getting tricked by a pretty picture, and thinking, oh, I want to paint that because it's pretty. And you're also just going to know why you're drawn to certain things, which is going to help a lot. Uh, this happens a lot with portrait photos because um, a lot of portrait photographers, uh, they do certain things to make the person look better. Like this photo on the left, like guy looks great, nice soft skin, evenly lit, no harsh shadows, but that's going to be very difficult to paint. I remember I would run into this problem a lot when I was doing commissions because people would send me photos like this where they look great in the photo, but I'm like, this is going to be hard to paint. There's no values. You can see when I put these two, because the one on the right, it's a good reference photo. When I put it in this filter for just value shapes, the guy on the left, he's got like two values in his whole face. Like all of his nose and his cheeks are just one value. That's going to be very hard to communicate form with just two values. You're going to have to rely a lot on color shifts. Whereas the guy on the right, it's got a whole bunch of shapes and, very distinct light and shadowed side of the face. So, being able to train your eye to see value relationships better and practicing that, it's going to help you choose portrait photos a lot better. You're not going to be slaving away at a photo, trying to get it to work and not knowing why. Um, like I said, like I went through that a lot with commissions, and it took me a while to realize after like showing them and then wanting to make revisions, and I show them again, they're like, oh, it's not quite right. And I realized like, oh, like this photo I'm using is pretty tough. It's not really giving me what I need. Um, I will say though, fair warning to seeing paintings everywhere is that you're going to be constantly like stopping and like taking photos. Um, I'm lucky that my fiance is very patient with me because we go on a lot of walks, and I'm like always stopping and taking photos. I'm like, oh, this could be a painting. This could be a painting. But I like to think I make up for it because I always put her or both of us in the paintings. And like I did this one. This was like right outside of our apartment when we started dating, and it had just like rained, and there was a bunch of like water, like puddles and the reflections. I was like, "Ooh, I want to get this one," and ended up painting it, and it turned out really well. You can see I did like a little zoom in photo. That's us, our little Chihuahua Coco. Um, Framed it, and now she has it in her office. But just fair warning, like anytime you go out places, you can be, "Ooh, that's a painting. That's a painting. That's a painting." So. But moving on to some more student examples. This student's painting, I feel like they did a good job, like very good choice to simplify the background here and not try and get like all this detail. Really good choice. Um, Really good colors, really good form happening. I do feel like they actually could have used more of what the photo was giving them, because it's actually a good, like the photo, it has very good distinct light and shadow. It's very clear, whereas in their painting, I feel like they kind of softened things up a bit. Good choice to change the shirt color. Like all that green and then a green shirt probably would have been too much. So good choice right there. But I put it into Photoshop and just painted over it by hand. And just with like these simple colors, you can see how much, or simple values, you can see how much you can communicate. Like just the arm here on the left, there's three values. There's like this, or colors, there's this under the arm, it's getting a lot of reflected green light from the dress. And then there's the shadow, and then there's light side. And just having those three creates the form really well. Same thing on the right side, the arm on the right side. Same with the hair, even, I always say think of hair as if it's carved out of like wood or stone. And so you got this one plane of the hair that's facing light, other plane facing dark, and just that form. Even the face, you could this could be painted very, very simply, especially since she's looking down. You don't see her eyes. It's not like you have to get like a perfect likeness of it. The violin's got a lot of great colors in it because you got the light hitting it. Um, so I just would have, tried and utilize that a little bit more. Like if I was to paint this, this is how I'd start it. I'd start it blocky like this, but getting those base colors and values down. Another student example here, um, they I feel like this is a good example of a photo making it very difficult to paint. Like this photo is a hard one to paint. It's overcast day. There's not distinct light and shadow because they did like a good job with the drawing. I really like the colors. I like how they muted the colors to try and sit them back there. But the thing is, like all the colors are muted because it's an overcast day. And I would get a lot of photos like these when I was doing commissions, especially like full body, and the client wanted to be able to tell it was the person. I'm like, well, their head's going to be like this small on a canvas. So can I zoom in, or do you have any other photos? So even though like this students got a good understanding of color, understanding of drawing, I feel like what's holding them back the most is just the reference photo. It's a very like I would struggle to paint this one as well. This student chose a good photo of Anthony Hopkins, very distinct light and shadow. But when I saw their paint, I mean, first off, looks, the eyes, nose, mouth, everything looks exactly like him. Really, really good. But the first thing that jumped out at me, like the little foundation alarm that went off, I was like, huh, their highlight in the head doesn't look as like bright and shiny as the photo. I'm like, what is that? So I put it into black and white. I was like, oh, the surrounding color isn't dark enough. Okay. And I actually just went into Photoshop, took the colors from the photo and crudely just kind of put in the planes. You can see how much darker they could have gone with it. So even like if the photo is lending itself to a good painting, there's still little subtlety things that you can pick up on and enhance what you see and communicate a good painting. So I know at this point, you listen to me talk for a while. I've got into a lot of stuff here with the fundamentals. Um, yeah, it's been about 15 minutes, closing in on an hour now of straight talking. I know you feel overwhelmed, and I'm just kind of scratching the surface with all these things with the fundamentals. But I like to think now that you know the right path, or hopefully you're more inclined to go down this fundamental path instead of trial and error. And that you can now go and like with your own paintings, look for these things. And as you go painting by painting, be thinking about these fundamentals and what you can improve on because we can always get better at these fundamentals. Now, I know even though that you know the path to take now, it can still be scary and you still probably have a ton of questions. Um, which is why I've made like kind of a guide for this path. It's my Foundations of Oil Painting course. I know a lot of you probably on this call have taken this course. But for those who have not, would you mind if I talked a little bit about my Foundations of Oil Painting course? I'm gonna check the chat. Someone says, please do. Sure, go ahead. Okay, okay, okay. Um, so I made this course a few years ago, and it's, now that you've heard my story about like how I got here and what I went through, like I made this course like I really, when I was constructing it, thinking about my younger self and wishing I could just go back in time and just hand this course to myself. And it touches on everything that I was talking about in this presentation. And since I learned a majority of what I know through online courses and tutorials, like I feel like I know where they can fall short and what I wish certain people would have done in their online courses. And I've tried to fill that gap in mine. So like this isn't just me doing tutorials and talking while I'm doing it. I mean, that's in there, but I include lectures that I've tried really hard to simplify these kind of complex ideas, or ideas that are hard to wrap your mind around in the most simple way. Like I break down in lectures drawing, color, value, plane, simplification in a way that you can actually understand them. Like you don't need to have gone to art school to understand the vocabulary or stuff that I use. Um, I also include exercises. You know, I talked a ton about exercises throughout this whole presentation, so now I'm actually going to give you some. You can do a still life painting that's small, simple, so you can just focus on getting those right colors, getting those right values. Do a small landscape study that's going to take you like half an hour, 45 minutes. That's just flat shapes and getting it to work with just those flat shapes of color and value. And then that exercise that I talked about with the photo put into Photoshop with just the using the cutout filter, the value study app, and building those flat shapes on top of each other to construct the form. And I feel like it's really important for people starting out to paint different subjects because it's almost like cross training in a way. And you're going to learn things while doing a still life that you probably wouldn't have learned doing a landscape, and learn things in a portrait you probably wouldn't have done in a still life. And doing all three, it's going to just make you such a better painter. Because you're going to be able to fill gaps in your painting game through different subject matter. Also, it's just it's going to keep you from getting bored. Like I'm constantly switching around in my own work just because it keeps things fresh. And whenever I feel like I'm getting stale in a subject, I'll switch, go to a different subject, and it'll give me fresh to come back. So in the course, you get to do two portraits, still life and landscape. Um, like I said, this course has been out 3 years now. I've had over 3,000 students go through it, and I'm always getting like on Instagram, people posting stuff, and it makes me so happy because like this is why it's why I started my YouTube channel. It's why I made this course, is to get more people painting. I feel like a lot of people are afraid to oil paint, and they don't need to be afraid to paint. That's the main thing too, is like, don't be afraid to paint. Like having oil paint in your life, it's something you can do forever. And it's going to add so much to your life. Even if you don't want to like be professional, like just having this is going to help so much. And it's so much more fun when you know what you're doing. So I also included three extra bonus tutorials in there for you. These are like kind of my most popular from my Patreon page, and they're still life, landscape, and portrait. So you got even more to practice with. But most recently, I added some bonus lessons. If you already have the course, don't worry, these are in there. If you go check, I put them in. But I put a lesson in on water mixable paint because I've used it in the past. I painted in a restaurant where they wouldn't allow me to use regular oils. It was like live painting. Then you get to sell your put your paintings on the wall and sell them. And I actually sold a lot of paintings that way. And so I had to use water mixable oil paint, and I actually use them just like regular oil paint. And so I put a quick little lesson in here at the beginning for those that want to go through water mixable paint. And I'll show you how I use water mixable paint just like regular oils. Also added a section on brushwork because over the years, so many people ask me about brushwork, and it's a very kind of difficult thing to explain to people. You have to explain while doing it, and so I have a lesson there on brushwork, how to add expression to your brushwork, how to communicate more with less. Also added a really fun, probably the best exercise you can do for brushwork, which is paint an apple in limited number of brush strokes. So you paint it with like 25 brush strokes, then 20, then 15. So that one's in there as well. And probably the coolest thing that I've added is I've added a new studio guide. I gave you a tour of my new studio that I have here. And the thing is like when I first started my channel, my studio was the balcony of my apartment, which was like 3 feet by 8 feet. That's been my studio. My studio has been in my bedroom in an apartment with three other guys. Studio's been in like the lanai of my mom's house. So like I know what it's like to not have any space or money to have a place to paint, which is why I've added this part to give you like my best advice for how to set things up, what lighting to use. Everybody's studio is different. Everybody's got different circumstances. So I just wanted to give kind of the most overarching help that I could to help anybody, no matter how big or small their studio space is. So you guys tour my studio, and then I'll sit down for like 20 minutes and just give my best advice and explaining um, things you can do in terms of like lighting. I show you actually the space also where I film my tutorials if anybody out there is interested in filming filming their stuff. But I talk about easels and all that good stuff. So since I've recently added these extra things, I've had to bump the price to 147. So foundations course, tutorials, studio guide, brushwork lessons. Um, Still cheaper than some of the DVDs I bought back in the day. Um, and whenever I would buy those DVDs, or whenever people ask me like, "Oh, is tutorials worth it? This or that?" I always say, you know, I always think like if you can come away with like one thing, would it be worth it? And so for this one, if all this thing did was help you maximize your practice time, would it be worth it? If all it did was help you not get overwhelmed with detail, would it be worth it? If all it did was help you see more paintings and get inspired more, would it be worth it? And I honestly think, it would, because I've gone the other route of the trial and error. But it's not 147 yet. That's going to happen in a week on September 29th. So I'm keeping the price at just 97 bucks right now until then.
Wow, thanks for sticking around to the end. If you want to pick up the course, a link to do that is in the description of this video. And remember, if you get the course and you do the paintings and you post them on Instagram, make sure to tag me at Forza43 and use the hashtag PaintCoach. I love seeing them. I love reposting them. All right, I'm Chris Fornatero here telling you to go get painting.